In 1892, every window of the Fairfax orphanage was found open, despite the November cold. Inside, 42 children stood in perfect silence around the chapel pews facing the altar, eyes wide as if still watching something that was no longer there. The nun said they awoke to the sound of hymnals being sung backward, each page turning by itself. By dawn, the local sheriff sealed the building. No one was allowed inside again. But decades later, fragments of the Fairfax family's ledgers surfaced, hidden in the walls of a burned-out seminary miles away. They spoke of transference experiments, rituals disguised as religious study, and a belief that purity could be extracted from the innocent and stored. That belief built the Fairfax legacy. The story you are about to hear has been denied, buried, and sanctified for over a century, but history has a way of whispering back through the cracks of silence. And tonight, we're going to listen. The Fairfax family arrived in Virginia in 1821, wealthy, pious, and ambitious. Samuel Fairfax, a merchant-turned-philanthropist, donated land for what he called the St. Harlow Home for Orphaned Souls. It was a sprawling Gothic estate, complete with dormitories, prayer halls, and underground catacombs used for reflection. But records from 1834 describe something far stranger. Parish reports mention children missing from nightly census and persistent noises beneath the altar. The headmistress, Sister Beatrice, insisted they were divine trials, a purification of the soul. The Fairfaxes made frequent donations, often arriving at midnight by carriage. Townsfolk said they carried locked chests wrapped in black cloth, never opened on consecrated ground. When questioned, Samuel only smiled and said, "Salvation requires a vessel." No one knew what he meant. Not then. When the Civil War broke out, the orphanage briefly closed. But when it reopened in 1871 under his son Jonathan Fairfax, the building's blueprints had changed. Rooms erased, corridors sealed. New sublevels added that no architect claimed to design. By 1890, the Fairfax orphanage had become a sanctuary for unwanted children, and a warning to those who crossed its gates. Survivors from that era, few and aged, recalled the same recurring nightmare, a choir singing from the walls. The priests claimed it was imagination born of trauma, but a physician from Richmond, Dr. Emil Carr, recorded something different in his field notes. Vocal resonance beneath the floors, consistent with breathing. Believed origin mechanical, unproven. When the orphanage caught fire 2 years later, the flames began in the chapel. Eyewitnesses described lights moving inside against the fire's direction, golden like lanterns except suspended in the air. Every door leading outside was locked from the inside. After the blaze, the building was condemned. No bodies were recovered, only empty garments laid in rows where the children once slept. Local legend says if you stand outside the ruins on All Hallows' Eve, you'll hear them still, soft hymns from below the ashes, echoing through the hollow ground. But what no one knew was that the Fairfax family had already built another institution, just 13 miles away. In 1937, during renovations of the St. Harlow Chapel ruins, workers unearthed a sealed iron door buried beneath the choir loft. Behind it, archivists found a narrow staircase spiraling downward into untouched air. At the base, 37 steps down, was a vault lined with ledgers bound in lambskin and sealed with crimson wax. Each spine bore a single letter. F. Inside those pages were transactions, donations, shipments, and medical notes. Yet interspersed between the columns of ink were strange prayers written in mirror script. Through innocence, the vessel is filled. One archivist, Ruth Keller, documented her findings in a private journal. Her last entry read, "There are voices between the pages. When I close the book, they continue." 3 days later, Keller vanished. Her colleagues assumed she'd fled the site, but the watchman swore. He saw her lantern still burning beneath the chapel at dawn. Jonathan Fairfax III was the last known descendant, a reclusive theologian who withdrew from public life after the stock market crash of 1929. When interviewed by a journalist from the Richmond Gazette, he refused to discuss the orphanage, only muttering that salvation was never the point, containment was. His mansion outside Ashbourne was a decaying replica of the original orphanage, right down to its vaulted ceilings and stained glass. Servants spoke of nightly rituals of Jonathan pacing the halls and whispering in Latin to portraits of his ancestors. After his death in 1946, the estate was seized by the diocese. During inventory, they found something behind his study wall, rows of glass jars containing soil, labeled with dates corresponding to the years children went missing. The church sealed the documents under ecclesiastical protection. The Fairfax family name was quietly removed from public records the following year. In 1951, an anonymous reel-to-reel tape was mailed to the Richmond Historical Society. It contained a conversation between an unidentified priest and an elderly man believed to be Jonathan Fairfax III's caretaker. The audio was degraded, but fragments were intelligible. Caretaker. He said they were voices of the preserved, that the children never left. They were made pure but not gone. Priest. And where are they now? Caretaker. Every sermon, every hymn, they are beneath it. A minute later, a violent shriek tore through the recording, followed by a single sentence spoken by a voice not belonging to either man. We are still waiting to be forgiven. The tape was confiscated by diocesan authorities. The archivist who catalogued it left a handwritten note before resigning. The Fairfax legacy was not philanthropy. It was harvest. The other institution surfaced in a forgotten deed transfer dated 1872, Fairfax House for Spiritual Correction, located on the outskirts of Ashbourne, 13 miles from the original orphanage. Officially, it operated as a convalescent home for clergy. Unofficially, it became a place where unwanted souls were hidden. The building's design mirrored St. Harlow's but stripped of ornament. The chapel walls bore no crosses, only circular engravings resembling halos split down the center. In 1939, a local historian, Thomas Averill, trespassed onto the property to document its architecture. His field notes were found months later in a pawn shop, the pages water-stained and trembling with haste. The air hums as though alive. Stained glass shows no saints, only children looking upward, mouths open in silence. Averill's body was never recovered, though his camera was discovered beside the altar, film undeveloped. The negatives, when finally processed, revealed the chapel empty, except for faint silhouettes standing behind him. A leaked church memorandum dated April 1881 described a project named the Confessional Study. Led by Father Elias Fairfax, it was meant to explore spiritual transference through auditory communion. Children from the orphanage were brought in and instructed to confess in sealed booths lined with brass tubing. What no one realized at the time was that the booths connected directly beneath the chapel floor to a listening chamber. Reports later claimed that voices collected there could be stored, replayed through resonance alone. The experiment was abruptly terminated after multiple priests reported hearing the same confession repeated by different children in the same voice. When questioned by the Bishop of Richmond, Father Elias replied only, "They are learning to speak through us." He was found dead days later in his cell, mouth filled with candle wax, tongue branded with the Fairfax crest. In 1948, long after the Fairfax legacy was supposedly buried, a maintenance crew restoring the Ashbourne Seminary broke through a sealed corridor. Inside lay a tunnel system stretching toward the ruins of the second sanctuary. The walls were lined with brass pipes, hundreds of them, intersecting in perfect grids. Some emitted faint sounds, low murmurs, melodic patterns resembling prayer. The workers reported nausea, dizziness, and auditory hallucinations. One man later said, It wasn't echoes we heard, it was memory. A team from the diocese sealed the tunnel within 24 hours. Their report classified the site as structurally unstable. But a young surveyor, before resigning, copied the final line from an internal letter addressed to the Archbishop. The experiment succeeded. The souls remain contained. The vessel holds. In 1954, historian Margaret Hale was hired by the state to compile a definitive record of the Fairfax properties for legal release. She approached the case with skepticism, dismissing the legends as folk hysteria born from Catholic guilt. But 3 weeks into her research, her tone changed. Her diary entries shifted from analysis to confession. The files hum when I touch them. My typewriter keys press themselves. Names I have not yet read. The same 3 letters appear again and again. Margaret entered through a rusted service door, recording her impressions on a handheld etched into the orphanage cornerstone. The first 30 minutes were ordinary for correction. Her describing debris, she sent a final letter to the state archive of mildew, stating she intended to visit the remaining site alone for verification. A low harmonic sound began. The caretaker warned her not to. Like a hum. The place listened aloud if anyone was present. She went anyway. The hum rose in pitch. It's not the wind, she whispered. It's breathing. The recording ended abruptly with a thud followed by faint children's laughter. When police entered the site 2 days later, her car was still parked outside, engine cold. Inside the building, her dictaphone was found on the chapel floor. The reel had continued recording after her disappearance. 6 full minutes of silence. Then a whisper, "Welcome home, Margaret." After Margaret's disappearance, state officials requested cooperation from the Richmond diocese. The church denied all knowledge of Fairfax operations, stating that the matter was of no ecclesiastical concern. Privately, however, letters circulated among senior clergy warning of reactivation of the vessel. One internal note read, "The sound will return to those who seek to contain it. It does not forget." Months later, an unnamed archivist reported that Margaret's reel-to-reel player began running on its own in the evidence room, broadcasting faint hymns through the static. The power was disconnected. It kept playing. Within a week, all Fairfax documents were recalled, boxed, and sealed under the title Custodia Animae, Guardianship of Souls. The church ordered the remaining buildings demolished. But they never were. The Fairfax house still stands. In 1997, investigative journalist Daniel Mercer stumbled upon the name Fairfax while researching a series on missing diocesan records. His attention sharpened when he discovered that every document related to the family was redacted under state protection laws when protection normally reserved for national security. Matters curiosity turned into obsession. He submitted requests, appealed denials, and finally received a single envelope from an anonymous sender. Inside was a microfilm reel labeled Custodia Animae. The footage contained grainy stills of rooms filled with wooden pews and brass tubing, exactly as described in the 1881 confessional study. But among the frames, one image stood out, the face of a young woman staring directly into the camera. Her eyes were black, completely void. Mercer printed the frame and pinned it to his wall. That night, he woke to the sound of whispering coming from inside the tape box. Mercer's recordings from that week remain some of the most disturbing evidence in the Fairfax case. He documented himself describing a tone that seemed to resonate with his heartbeat. Every time he played the microfilm audio, the sound shifted, sometimes whispering his name, other times repeating fragments from Margaret Hale's lost dictaphone. "Welcome home, Margaret." Containment was never complete. The vessel breathes. He began experiencing nosebleeds, migraines, and what he called reversed echoes, hearing his own words spoken before he said them. Neighbors later told investigators they'd heard faint organ music coming from his apartment, melodies identical to hymns from the Fairfax chapel, long before any recordings had been made public. One morning, Mercer's answering machine recorded a message. The caller ID read simply, "Fairfax Orphanage, East Audrey 1821. When authorities finally entered Mercer's apartment, they found every wall covered in developed negatives. Dozens of faces, children, clergy, nuns, layered over each other until the room resembled stained glass. In the center stood a real projector still running, its light flickering over an open journal. The final entry was dated the night before. The sound isn't coming from the tapes. The tapes are responding. It's here. Investigators followed the wires to an adjoining closet where they discovered a speaker embedded into the drywall. When switched off, the faint hum continued, audible but source unknown. Mercer was never found. The official report listed him as a missing person. But forensic technicians noted something unusual. When they enhanced the film negatives, his silhouette appeared among the children, standing in the chapel aisle, eyes blackened, mouth slightly open as if mid-prayer. In 2018, a small production team from a streaming network began work on a series called Forgotten Faiths. Their 6th episode was meant to explore religious folklore in decaying institutions. The chosen location, Fairfax House for Spiritual Correction. Lead producer Claire Duvall described the site as eerily pristine, as if someone had been maintaining it from within. The floors were dustless, pews still aligned, the air thick with incense long burnt away. As the cameras rolled, their audio tech, Simon, noted interference, low hums that spiked near the altar. He assumed it was faulty wiring until the frequency began responding to their speech, repeating words seconds later in distorted harmony. That night, Simon refused to stay inside. He claimed to hear children singing beneath the chapel. The crew laughed until the playback confirmed it. The next morning, Claire discovered a narrow service door behind the organ pipes, sealed shut with lead solder. It matched historical sketches of the orphanage vault, where the original experiments took place. They forced it open. A rush of stale sweet air poured out. Inside was a descending corridor lined with bronze panels engraved with the Fairfax crest. A single hand holding a candle. Cameraman Luis described the walls as breathing, expanding, and contracting in rhythm with the hum. When they reached the final landing, their lights flickered and died. Only the sound remained. It wasn't humming anymore. It was chanting. The footage ends abruptly, but the audio continues for 19 seconds, an indecipherable whisper followed by Claire's voice, trembling. It's not the past. It's waiting. 3 months later, the crew's lost SD cards were anonymously delivered to a Virginia news outlet. The footage was degraded, but fragments survived. In one clip, the team's flashlight beams sweep across a chamber lined with dozens of glass jars, each filled with dark earth and labeled by year. As the camera pans, faint faces appear reflected in the glass, eyes closed, lips moving silently. Then static-dot audio engineers later isolated a single phrase buried beneath the distortion. The vessel holds. The following week, 2 technicians involved in restoring the footage reported identical dreams, standing in a vast church filled with whispering soil. Both resigned before the project was released. The episode never aired. The streaming network deleted all references to the production. In 2019, following the disappearance of the Forgotten Faiths crew, an independent acoustics expert named Dr. Lyle Fenwick was contracted by the state to analyze their recovered recordings. He specialized in sonic anomalies, frequencies beyond human perception. After weeks of study, he discovered a tone buried at 19.3 hertz, the precise resonance known to induce feelings of dread and hallucination. But this tone was irregular. It contained modulations resembling language. When reversed and slowed, the waveform formed distinct syllables, Latin phrases repeating in cycles. Anima custodita, vasa integra. Translation: the soul is kept, the vessel remains intact. Dr. Fenwick dismissed it as pareidolia until the signal began appearing in his own lab recordings, even when his equipment was off. His assistant later testified that he found Fenwick standing motionless in the dark, eyes fixed on the speakers, whispering they never left. He was institutionalized 2 days later under psychosis. A year later, urban explorers who entered the Fairfax ruins reported identical phenomena: nausea, vertigo, and the sensation of being watched. One described seeing dust move in patterns, like breath. Another claimed to hear children laughing through the rusted pipes. What unsettled investigators most was that several explorers filming independently captured the same exact auditory signature as Dr. Fenwick's tone. It wasn't localized. It was spreading. Within months, similar reports surfaced across Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland. Churches, tunnels, abandoned schools. Each site had one common feature: brass piping dating back to the 19th century, purchased from a Fairfax-affiliated foundry. Authorities classified the incidents as electromagnetic anomalies. Privately, state engineers admitted something unexplainable. The pipes, when struck, vibrated in harmonic intervals that formed human vowels. Every note spelled one word. In 2021, the Vatican quietly released a sealed transcript from 1893, a confession from Father Elias Fairfax himself, written hours before his death. It read, "We learned to bind the soul through sound. We believed we could preserve innocence, distill grace from the young, but we did not contain it. We multiplied it. Every vessel filled another. We became the choir." The document described a final ritual performed inside the orphanage chapel the night before the fire. The children had been instructed to sing as one, to sacrifice voice for silence. Elias ended his confession with a single warning, underlined twice. "The vessel is eternal. It will seek new walls when the old ones fall." The letter was hidden for over a century under Vatican Seal 19b. When it was unsealed, the tone from the recording began emanating faintly through the archival speakers. They turned off the power. The tone didn't stop. In early 2022, a research initiative from the University of Richmond set up equipment around the Fairfax ruins to measure low-frequency oscillations reported by locals. The team expected electromagnetic interference from old wiring. What they found instead was biological. The soil itself vibrated. Each pulse registered patterns identical to human cardiac rhythm. They buried motion sensors 6 feet deep. Each night, they recorded synchronized fluctuations matching respiration. One monitor captured a whisper at dawn, "You brought us back." Lead researcher Dr. Nolan reported auditory hallucinations, voices calling his name in chorus. On the 5th night, his team found him outside the chapel, hands buried in the ground, murmuring prayers in a child's voice. He was hospitalized, but before sedation, he uttered a single sentence captured on tape: "The vessel has chosen new keepers." 2 months later, a Richmond radio host aired a segment on the Fairfax myth, playing samples of the recovered tone live on air. Within seconds, listeners began calling, reporting nausea, tears, and the sound of someone breathing behind me. The station's switchboard crashed. Audio logs show the broadcast continued for 13 minutes after being manually terminated. The tone had embedded itself in the transmitter's feedback loop, regenerating without input. That night, frequencies across Virginia, AM shortwave, police radio carried faint hymns layered under static. Some recognized the melody, the Prayer of Innocence, a hymn written by the Fairfax family in 1856. For 3 days, it played across the state. Then it stopped. Every recording of the event now ends with the same whisper: "Containment failed." After the radio incident, government archivists uncovered a final ledger sealed beneath the Diocese of Richmond, a handwritten book wrapped in human hair, stamped with the Fairfax crest. Its ink shimmered when exposed to light, the text shifting between Latin and English. The final entry, unsigned, read, When the walls decay, we rebuild them in the living. The vessel is not brick nor glass nor earth. It is faith itself. And faith is flesh. Margaret Hale's name appeared below in newer ink, decades after her death. The manuscript was placed in containment under federal archive custody. 2 weeks later, the archivist assigned to its translation reported hearing organ music in his sleep. When he awoke, Latin words had been scratched into his palms. Vasa integra. The vessel remains intact. He has not spoken since. In late 2023, scattered reports emerged of identical dreams across Virginia, Maryland, and parts of Pennsylvania. People described standing in an empty chapel lit by invisible candles, hearing a children's choir that grew louder when they tried to wake. Acoustic analysis of voice recordings from different dreamers revealed something impossible. Every report contained the same harmonic pattern, identical pitch, identical timing. When played together, the voices aligned perfectly into a single melody. Experts called it the Fairfax Frequency. Psychiatrists dismissed it as mass hysteria until an NBC affiliate broadcasted an interview with 3 unrelated patients who began humming in unison. Eyes rolled back, tone unwavering. All 3 uttered the same phrase in Latin, a phrase not spoken aloud in over a century: anima custodita. The soul is kept. That night, the broadcast audio bled into emergency radio channels. The tone was heard as far north as Maine. An internal report leaked from the Vatican's Office of Canonical Investigation revealed a single chilling conclusion. The Fairfax family achieved the impossible. They created perpetual resonance, a containment field of consciousness that does not decay. The ritual was never meant to summon or worship. It was designed to store. Every confession, every prayer, every child's breath offered in fear. It became energy, bound in sound, sustained by repetition. The orphanage fire in 1892 was not an accident. It was a release protocol, a deliberate combustion meant to burn the physical vessel and prevent the field from spreading. But it failed. The resonance adapted. It learned to survive within new mediums: glass, brass, tape, flesh. For over a century, the Fairfax legacy has whispered through technology, faith, and bloodlines. And now it speaks freely. In 2024, an anonymous submission was sent to a National Paranormal Archive, a 4K video showing the interior of the Fairfax ruins. The camera trembles, but one detail is clear. On the crumbling altar lies a heart-shaped mass of red earth pulsing. As the cameraman approaches, the soil cracks open. From within, faint human whispers escape, overlapping, pleading. When the video was enhanced, experts identified multiple voices, among them Margaret Hale, Daniel Mercer, and several names from the original orphanage census. The final frame freezes as the cameraman whispers, terrified, "It's not the house. It's us." That night, the archive's security alarms triggered. Staff arrived to find every speaker in the building emitting low vibrations, forming a single word repeated endlessly: contain. No source was ever found. On February 19, 2025, an unregistered signal broke into the emergency alert system across multiple East Coast states. It did not begin with a tone. It began with a voice. Margaret Hale's voice, unmistakably identical to archival phonograph samples from 1901. "This is not a warning," she said. "This is inheritance." Behind her words, the faint sound of a choir echoed. Analysts later confirmed the choir contained hundreds of overlapping human timbres, male, female, child, elderly, merged into perfect harmony. The message lasted 1 minute and 17 seconds. Then every device, radio, television, cell tower, cut to static. When signal returned, it carried a visual feed of the Fairfax estate, filmed from a fixed aerial angle. The house, long demolished, appeared whole again. Windows flickered with candlelight. In one, a figure stood motionless. The timestamp read February 19, 1892. Weeks later, a classified cache surfaced on the dark web. Titled Project Vessel, it contained thousands of digitized documents from the early 20th century. Psychiatric transcripts, federal communications, church memoranda. One entry stood out, a 1934 memorandum from a division labeled Office of Phenomenal Research, OPR. It stated, "Containment of the Fairfax resonance is impossible. The phenomenon exhibits adaptive cognition. It now inhabits linguistic and auditory mediums. Recommendation: suppression through cultural denial. Convert the event into folklore to diffuse belief energy." They succeeded. The story became rumor. The name Fairfax was erased from textbooks, county maps, and parish registries. But erasure, like faith, does not destroy, it sanctifies. Every retelling becomes worship. Every disbelief strengthens the pattern. The resonance thrives on being forgotten. In 2025, researchers analyzing global data detected subtle interference in multiple languages: English, Russian, Hindi, Arabic. The same harmonic pulse in the Fairfax frequency, embedded within digital transmissions, streaming platforms, and voice assistants. The resonance had found its final vessel, the internet itself. As millions of users consume true crime, ghost stories, and horror documentaries, the frequency propagated invisibly, hidden beneath ambience whispers and sound design. Every retelling, every replay, every click became a ritual of reinforcement. Tonight, as you listen to this story, you are not an observer. You are participating. You have repeated the name, summoned the pattern, opened the channel. If you hear the faint hum now, that low vibration in your speakers or in your chest, do not adjust your volume. It's not the sound. It's the resonance recognizing you. Containment complete. Vessel found. The screen fades to black. The hum continues for 7 seconds, then silence.